I'm Buddhika Emis. I'm head of marketing for Reuters. Welcome to Reuters and welcome to the launch of the Digital News Report 2023. To open, we're going to start with Alessandra Galloni, editor-in-chief of Reuters, to do the opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning and a warm welcome to Reuters and to the launch of the 12th edition of the Digital News Report. Reuters, as ever, is thrilled to partner with the Reuters Institute again on today's launch of the report, which year after year is delivering critical insight into news consumption around the world. This year's report covers 46 markets and is equivalent to roughly half of the world's population. As you'll see, the report is full of fascinating findings, and all of them point to the fact that changing consumption habits and preferences mean that news publishers need to keep transforming. So I've been in journalism long enough, just about, to remember the pre-internet world. And, if you look over the past 3 decades, the industry has seen huge changes and incredible disruption as it has adjusted to the digital world. But even after this transformation that has already happened, the need for change, and this is both in how we cover news and how we deliver it, has become even more pronounced. Gen Z, for example, is discovering news in ever new ways. They prefer platforms like TikTok and other video-led networks instead of directly visiting news apps or websites. Younger consumers also want more participatory, personable, and personalized news. And those changes are coming just as trust in news and interest in news, as you know, continues to fall in many countries. Trust in news has fallen across markets by a further 2 percentage points in the last year. And this reverses many of the gains that actually we had seen during the coronavirus pandemic. More people are actively avoiding the news. In the UK, for example, interest in news has plummeted from 70% in 2015 to 43% this year. That's a 27-point drop. It is no surprise that misinformation and disinformation continue to be an issue. More than half the respondents of the report worry about their ability to distinguish between real and fake news on the internet. So our challenge as an industry is to transform and adapt, even as we regain our audience's attention and trust. So at Reuters, we see trust as our currency. It is so central to our mission that we are guided by a code that we call the trust principles, which spell out the need to provide independent, impartial, and trusted news without bias. So I hope you enjoy today's program. And now I will welcome, where is he? Nick Glicher, the COO of the Thomson Reuters Foundation.
Thanks very much, Alessandra. Good morning. I'm Nick Glicher. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Foundation, as you've just heard, and it's a pleasure to be with you this morning at the launch of this year's Digital News Report. The launch of this report is always an exciting moment, not just for journalists and media practitioners, but for all those who, like us, are invested in protecting a free and independent media around the world. Because what underpins the success of all of our work is a real understanding of how our audiences are changing the way that they consume news, why that is, and what the consequences will be for the profession. For those of you who may not know, the Thomson Reuters Foundation works to strengthen free, fair and informed societies, and we do that using our expertise in both journalism and the law. A key part of this is our mission to focus on advancing media freedom globally and ensuring championing journalism excellence. We focus on growing our networks, our expertise, our reach, our services, and we've been doing this for over 40 years now. And our work is challenging because we have to adapt to a radically changing landscape. And this changing landscape is challenging the viability of news outlets. It's destroying trust in news, and it's eroding a thirst for impartial, factual storytelling. As I'm sure pretty much all of you in this room are all too aware, the obstacles that journalists face today to deliver the critical scrutiny and impartial information that empowers audiences to understand and navigate the world in which they live continue to grow. From heightened economic pressures on news outlets, the explosion of mis and disinformation, the shift in appetite for news, all of this is radically impacting the ability for independent journalism to thrive. And added to this, we have the backdrop of surging developments in digital technologies that provide both great opportunity, but at the same time, unknown complexities. And it's these together that will govern what news will become. For professional public interest journalism to survive in this environment, we need to not only understand these transformative issues, but try to anticipate their trajectories as well. And in an era that is defined by consecutive and converging crises, independent and accurate news reporting is our most valuable currency. It redresses power imbalances. It is the best weapon that we have against mis and disinformation, and it brings in a plurality of voices that is otherwise lacking in the media landscape. I don't think it is an over-exaggeration to say that a free and vibrant media is the bedrock upon which democracies are built and human rights are upheld. And this is where the Digital News Report is such an invaluable resource for all of us who are committed to protecting a free media. It's long been the profession's Bible, looking at how we map global digital trends. It provides the world's most extensive analysis into how populations are consuming news, what influences their news habits, and how all of this is shaping global news consumption. And why is this important? It's important because while free and independent media are fighting the battle of their lives, we all have a role to play in a coordinated and strategic response. And the insights of the Digital News Report better equip us to do so. It better equips journalists, media freedom organisations and policymakers to help navigate the multiple challenges, the critical needs that journalists face. This is also why at the Thomson Reuters Foundation, we're doubling down on our work on media freedom. Earlier this year, for example, and in collaboration with the Tao Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia University, we launched the first report that builds a data-led global overview of prevalent trends in the weaponization of the law against journalists. Our hope is that this resource will empower all those fighting to protect strong, free and independent media and will serve to drive a united and collaborative response. At the Foundation, we will continue to leverage our global network of journalists and media organisations and of lawyers and governments to ensure that this research acts as a springboard for action to bring people together to try to address these critical threats to a free press. Alongside this, we've been expanding our media development remit to support media in exile, ensuring that journalists who are fleeing conflict zones are able to continue providing independent and accurate reporting. We're building on our raft of products and services to protect the safety of journalists, both on and offline, by mitigating the effects of harassment and intimidation. And we're working to strengthen the sustainability and quality of independent local journalism around the world. And we do this through a range of different mentoring and capacity building interventions. And additionally, of course, the Foundation is incredibly proud to provide core funding to the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, one of the world's most powerful and respected centres producing high-impact research and driving journalism excellence. And it is important research, such as the work that the Reuters Institute does, that will govern our ability to shape the future of news and everything that depends on it. But without further ado, let me stop there, and I will welcome Newman to Rasmus Nielsen to the stage. Welcome, Rasmus.
Thank you so much, everyone who's come today, and for everyone who's joining us online. I will say simply this. I think one aspiration of many journalists is to seek truth and report it, whether the news is good or bad, whether it's welcome or worrying, and that this aspiration is based on the belief that better informed people can make better decisions based on their own different ideals, their own different interests, their own different values, the context in which they find themselves. This journalistic aspiration is the same ethos that we practice in our research at the Reuters Institute. We cannot guarantee what the outcomes are of our work, but we think it's important that we interrogate questions that concern all of us and journalists and news media across the world, and that we report our findings in a consistent and clear way so that people can make informed decisions about the future of journalism. That's what we try to do in all our work with the journalists we work with in our journalism programs, the editors and news media executives we work with in our leadership programs, and what we do in our research, which is really is a team effort. I really need to stress this. It's an incredible team effort. Nick and I get to sort of front it up sometimes. But we work with amazing researchers from many different parts of the world. We work with country partners who have deep personal experience of each of the markets that we cover, 46 on 6 continents. And it is only together that we can make this report possible and then bring it alive when we publish and start the conversations we have with colleagues all over the world. The report is based on an online survey. As with every method, there are limitations to this approach. We are very clear about those limitations and explicit that this is a study of people's reported news media use and their opinions and beliefs about news and media across the world. It is based on online samples that are nationally representative in countries with high levels of internet penetration, but in many of the markets we cover across the world, it will underrepresent the habits and preferences of older people, of less affluent people, and people with less connectivity, often in remote parts of these countries, and we should always take that into account. The report is made possible by, of course, our core funder, the Thomson Reuters Foundation, but the report itself by 18 different funders, a large grant from the Google News Initiative, as well as support from news organizations, including Reuters, NHK, BBC, media regulators, including Ofcom here in the UK, universities, foundations, as well as new sponsors such as Code for Africa, who is just one of many sponsors who are very committed to us continuing and hopefully in the future expanding our work in the Global South, because they believe this work matters also there. With that, I will simply hand it over to the lead author, Nick Newman, who will present key findings from this year's report. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rasmus. One of the key themes that comes out of this year's data across countries is the fraying connection between news organizations and audiences, and particularly some audiences. And one illustration of this is a question we ask about what your main access point is. What's your main gateway to news? Where do you start your news journey? Is it direct? Is it via social search aggregators? And we can see here in this chart over time, direct access in the blue has consistently fallen from 32%, this is average data across all countries, to 22% since 2018, and you can see social media preferences in pink have grown by similar amounts as platforms continue to play a bigger role. It's not just social, of course. Search remains important, along with aggregators, mobile alerts, and email. These are averages, and of course there are big country differences. And actually, if you look at the UK, direct routes remain important. Very powerful brands like the BBC are part of that. But just look at these age differences. So over half, 52% of over 35s are still going direct, but under 35s are much less likely to go directly and far more likely to use that combination of social and search. So let's just see how those generational differences have developed over time. So over 35s in the blue, pretty stable, hardly changed preferences over the last 9 years. But if we layer on the youngest group, 18 to 24s, you can see how they have increasingly much weaker connections with news brands, much less likely to go direct. So social media and other platforms are becoming relentlessly more important, but it's not necessarily the same networks. This chart shows how Facebook has become much less influential for news over the last few years as other networks have grown. This is aggregated data from 12 countries, including the UK. And we can see that 42% said they accessed news from Facebook in 2016 weekly, and that's fallen to 28% this year. That's partly Facebook themselves pulling back from news, but it's also the rise of these other networks, particularly the growth of video-led networks like YouTube, you can see increasing, Instagram and TikTok. All of those three have become more important this year. Interestingly, little change in Twitter's user base, according to our data, in terms of reach, despite all the upheavals of the Elon Musk era. Very few people are using alternatives like Mastodon at the moment. So again, these are averages, but if we look at 18 to 24s, we see even more dramatic shifts in the networks these social natives are using for any purpose. So I've simplified this chart a bit just to show that decline in Facebook and the rapid rise in TikTok, which of course is now driving much of Facebook's strategy around video and the investment in creators. So it's not just TikTok itself, it's the effect it has more widely. If we look across all of our markets and specifically on news, we see that TikTok is the fastest growing social network, especially in parts of Asia, Latin America, and Africa. It's become a significant factor, for example, in recent elections in Kenya, including being a way in which misinformation and disinformation was spread, but also for driving other changes in countries like Thailand, where we've just seen social media campaigns bringing a much younger political party to the forefront. But what do we mean when we say people use TikTok or other networks for news? What sources are people paying most attention to? Is it journalists? Is it politicians? Is it social media influencers? Is it ordinary people? So this chart, this question tries to answer that, and I think it tells a really interesting story. So these are averages across country, and you can see that the blue on the left, mainstream media journalists, that's the dark blue bar, they do play a significant role when looking at news on Twitter and also Facebook, obviously alongside alternative sources and politicians and celebrities. But if you look at the networks on the right of this chart, when it comes to Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok, more attention is being paid to personalities, which includes social media influencers and celebrities, than to journalists, even when it comes to news. Now, clearly, more media companies have been piling into TikTok recently, but I think the nature of the platform, the personality-driven nature of it, does make it more challenging for mainstream media companies. Maybe this is a point we can pick up on the panel. Now, you may remember that last year a lot of the headlines from our report was about this idea of selective news avoidance. So people who consume news but also actively avoid it sometimes or often. And this year we've tried to understand a little bit more about what's behind that, but also what we might do about it. So firstly, just the overall numbers, aggregated across 46 markets, pretty similar to last year. Just 36% say they sometimes or often avoid the news, but you can see significantly higher than 2017. The UK is slightly above global average. We identified, in looking at this in more detail, two overlapping groups. So firstly, about half of people who say they avoid the news are trying to avoid all news, and some of the behaviors we heard about included changing the radio channel when the news comes on and then switching it back, or scrolling quickly past the news on social media. So there's a strong link with this group with low interest in news and low interest in politics, and we call this periodic avoiders. And then there's a second group who are interested in the news but are taking more specific actions to reduce their news consumption. So this could be checking the news less often, for example, cutting out news first thing in the morning, or it could be to avoid particular types of news that makes them feel anxious. And this is very much linked to people who feel overloaded by the amount of news, or say that brings their mood down. And I think this is probably a useful distinction because you need to use different tactics with each of these groups to address these problems. Just to bring that to life a little bit, here's a couple of quotes from the qualitative work we did this year. Here's somebody in the UK who's trying to avoid news about the economy because they find it depressing, looking for something lighter. And then somebody in the US who is avoiding political news because it makes them angry. In terms of the subjects that people are trying to avoid, the number one subject this year that people said they were avoiding was the war in Ukraine, then national politics, crime, social justice. So these are important issues. This is the lifeblood of journalism and what we think is important as journalists. So what approaches might help? So our data suggests that over half of those who avoid the news sometimes or often say they're interested in more positive news or journalism that offers solutions and also explanation. They're least interested in the type of news that gives them constant updates on the big stories of the day. And this is in stark contrast with people who say they never avoid the news, who say they're most interested in that type of news. So perhaps, again, this is something we can pick up on the panel. The one-size-fits-all approach which many news organizations take, maybe that needs to change. Every year we take the temperature on trust in the news. You've heard about it already, and we've heard about that bump in trust we had during COVID. This year, as we've heard, the headline rate has declined again. But if we look at it by country, we can see that huge variation across countries. This is not universal. We see trust is down in 15 countries. It's up in 3 this year, and broadly stable in the rest. Here in the UK, about a third say they trust most news most of the time, and that is down from over half just before the Brexit referendum. So we've seen significant decline in the UK. Trust this year is up in the United States, still very low, but up. Perhaps because politics has become a little less toxic under Joe Biden. Also this year, we've looked at the perceived importance of independent public media, and these brands under significant pressure over funding, but also from audiences and reaching younger audiences. And this is the picture in the UK where we ask about how important publicly funded media news is to me personally and also to society. And it's interesting that when you look at the under 35s on the left, just around 4 in 10 say that the BBC News is important to them personally. And that's perhaps a lower figure because they tend to use the BBC less than older groups. Though the number does rise with those younger groups to around 50%, when they're thinking about the importance to society. This is pretty common across public broadcasters that we look at, and we're just going to compare that with Germany, and you can see there the generational divides are even more stark in terms of perceived importance. And it explains why public broadcasters across Europe are really trying to address that demographic challenge. Turning to the business of journalism, it's been a pretty tough year in terms of layoffs and closures across the world. We've heard about BuzzFeed News, Vice News filing for bankruptcy. And against that background, it's not surprising that we see publishers focusing less on advertising and more on subscription and membership and donations. Every year, we track the proportion that say they pay for online news through either membership, donation, or subscription. If we look across 20 countries, we can see broadly a slowing down of growth. A few cases up, a few cases down, and again, quite big differences across countries. So 39% in Norway, and then much lower here in the UK. Overall, the average of all of these countries remains unchanged from last year at 17%. And in previous years, we see a few very large brands, generally upmarket brands, taking a significant slice of the subscription pie. The New York Times, for example, accounts for more than a third of subscribers in the United States, and it's extended its lead this year over the Washington Post and others. But we're also seeing the growth of niche subscriptions, of aggregator subscriptions like Apple News Plus, and individual journalists through Substack newsletters and podcasts. We also looked at the impact of the cost of living crisis on subscription, and averaged across 20 markets. We found that almost 4 in 10 said they'd either cancelled the subscription, one of their subscriptions, or renegotiated the price in the last year. And in talking to those who'd done that, we got a sort of strong sense of how price conscious many people now are. So news is obviously just one of many ongoing expenses that people have at a very difficult time. And then for many people, you've had this shock when you jump from a trial price to full price, and that proves too much for many people, as in this case. We also ask people who aren't paying, which is the majority, what might encourage them to pay. For a few, more valuable content might make a difference. Some people might pay for a less cluttered experience, more ad-free, but the most likely reason was price. So cheaper or more flexible options, like being able to access multiple subscriptions for a single price. But for a very large proportion, the answer is there is nothing that would persuade people to pay for online news, and 65% in the UK. Free options for many people still, good enough. So finally, to formats and the greater adoption that we find of audio and video in this year's survey, sometimes at the expense of text online. And just to illustrate this, we've gone back to a question about preference. So this is not consumption, this is preference. Do you prefer to access online news in text, in video or audio? And these are the preferences for the UK, where we find across ages, people still prefer to read. But under 35s, as you can see, are less likely to say they prefer to read, more interested in watching or listening. And this, of course, may be because they're exposed to more through social media or through apps like YouTube or Spotify. But these preferences are also visible when you look at the consumption side. So this is global data, not UK data, but you see the bulk of online video is consumed through those social platforms or video platforms, so especially Facebook, YouTube, and increasingly TikTok as well. Older people are more likely to consume it, or much more likely than younger people to consume it on news websites. So just finally, podcasts, where we've seen in the last year in the UK really significant investment by publishers, commercial publishers, and also increases in consumption over time, relatively slow, but they're there. And I think publishers are really interested in this because of that younger age profile that you can see. But again, 12% say they've accessed a news podcast in the last month, so it's still something of a slow burn, and reaching more younger audiences, but more upmarket audiences. For the first time, we asked those who said they use news podcasts to name the ones they listen to regularly, and we classified them into different formats. So single deep dives like the Guardian's Today in Focus, or extended chat like newscasts from the BBC. And this is the list for the UK, and I think it's just really interesting to see so many of these extended chat formats. They're quite cheap to produce, relatively cheap compared with sort of narrative deep dive podcasts. And you have The Rest is Politics, you have newscasts from the BBC, and you have the News Agents, which didn't even launch a year ago, so it's less than a year old. Less than a third of news podcasts come from the BBC, as commercial companies have invested further. And you see some cross-national, so podcasts like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson, but the majority are created and consumed here in the UK. We've also tracked top shows in a number of other countries, and you will find that in the full report. So just a few takeaways to set up the discussion. So we're seeing significant shifts in the platforms people are using for news, driven by younger audiences turning their attention from what we might call legacy social platforms to next generation ones that place more of a premium on entertainment and on personalities. Secondly, the difficult nature of the news agenda, the sense that people can't get away from news, and divisions over politics are all contributing to low engagement in the news from some, and this concept of selective avoidance. As we've heard, audiences are looking for something more positive, or at least more hope. Both ad-based and subscription models are under pressure. They're compounded by the economic downturn and the cost of living crisis, and in turn that is making it harder for journalism to be truly independent from powerful businessmen and governments around the world. And then finally, in terms of formats, audio and video becoming a more important part of the mix, again driven by those preferences of younger consumers, and perhaps a bit more future-proof when it comes to artificial intelligence. I said I wasn't going to mention artificial intelligence. Now to the panel discussion.
Let's move to the panel now to discuss some of these insights and provide context. There'll be some time at the end for questions after the panel. So let me welcome Rasmus back on stage, the director of the Reuters Institute, to chair the panel. And Naja Nielsen, the digital director at BBC, very warm welcome to you. Thank you. And Kamal Ahmed, the editor-in-chief and the co-founder of the News Movement. And our own Jen Barrett, global editor, News Strategy. Over to you, Rasmus.
Thank you so much. And
Thanks everyone for agreeing to join the panel. And again, thanks to all of you who are here. We'll run through people's takes on some of the key findings that Nick highlighted towards the end of his whistle-stop tour of a much richer report that you can find on our website and communicated through various other channels. And I think maybe we should start with the platform shift. It's well known that publishers compete with platforms for attention, for advertising, for consumer spending, and can be sort of subject to the vagaries of seemingly arbitrary decisions made far away in California. But it's also the case that publishers engage with these platforms to try to reach people where they are. Naja, at the BBC, you still have strong direct connections with some parts of the British public, both offline and online. Are you seeing this shift away from direct access in your own work that we see in our data? And if so, how are you responding to that?
I think I think this has been happening ever since the digitization made it possible to invent the social media. And I think whenever we are discussing this, I think we have to not forget how great social media are. I don't know if is my sound okay? Right? Yeah. Social media allows us to stay in contact with each other across the world. We are having access to sources we could never find before. Before, journalism was very limited, and trust me, I was a journalist when you had to go to the library and find some microfilm, with some old newspapers, and where you could only do journalism based on whoever you could meet physically. Now we can, analyze data from Iran, see where the protests are, even though we can't be on the ground. So I want to get that in there, right? Silicon Valley has provided us with real innovation, and it's also forcing us to modernize. So I don't see it as an either or. I see it as a positive, natural thing, not ignoring the downside, that people live in an ecosystem of different platforms. And what we're trying to do at the BBC is to be a very healthy part of that ecosystem, a healthy part of the daily diet, a joyful, valuable part where people feel that in combination with things they're doing on TikTok and YouTube and whatever is coming next, what they're reading from the news movement or whatever else, that they are also really enjoying what they get from the BBC. And where we want to distinguish ourselves is, of course, we do not only want to be the most trusted, we also want to be the service that does provide people with the best explanation of what is going on, the most useful context, in a way the most empowering kind of information that make it possible for them to make their own choices. And that means that what we're doing in more tactical terms means that we are moving, we invest, and over the past years we do cut back, we do have to tighten our budgets, but we're consistently investing millions and millions and millions in our own digital sophistication, and at the same time expanding what we do on social media. So it's a both and. And that leads to us, if you look at the numbers from the past months, that we are weekly used on our digital platforms by 20% of young people in Britain, more than once, several times a week. They're using us, and when it's the overall population, of course, we are reaching around 80%, but across our platforms. But on social media like TikTok, we've invested specifically in that. It's a great place for innovation, and last month we had our biggest month so far with 82 million views, and half of those came from people under 25. And I'm not saying this to ignore the challenges. I'm just saying that maybe some of the challenges are down to us. If we want to be digital first, maybe we can address some of the challenges.
Thanks, Naja. Kamal, at the news movement, you aren't dependent on legacy direct channels that you have to fill and may unconsciously want to protect, even as audiences may be drifting away. On the other hand, you are quite dependent on platforms that aren't that focused on news, and that, as I said, sometimes can change quite quickly in ways that aren't necessarily what journalists and editors would want to see. How do you think about the challenges and opportunities from your point of view?
I think this is an amazingly exciting decade to be in journalism. I think, just building on what Naja said, it is all about and. I think as an industry, the whole point of us is providing trusted, factual news to help people navigate the world around them. As you said, it was part, as we said earlier in this event, it's part of democracy that journalism is engaging and helps people on that journey. But we need to go to where our audiences are. And the news movement is a relatively young business based in New York and London. And we are most focused on that demographic that was highlighted by Nick's comments, which is 18 to 25, that next generation of consumers. And as Naja says, and as the evidence shows, they consume in completely different ways. And it is about the richness of the ecology that the journalists and journalism as an industry provides. It is all about and, as Naja says. We have to shift in part to different styles of storytelling. And we have to go to where the audience is. We can't keep shouting at the audience to come to where we would like them to be, to consume material that doesn't interest them very much. So, how we storytell on social platforms is very different, not only on social platforms as opposed to owned and operated digital sites or television or newspapers, but is actually very different between the platforms. And so our journey is about thinking, what is the Instagram environment for? What is the TikTok environment for? What is the YouTube environment for? What is the Snap environment for? And we talk about behaving in the vernacular of the platform. Don't try and go to the platform like some ridiculous parent dancing at a rave in East London. You have to go to the platform and be genuine and authentic on that platform. The average age of our newsroom is 25. And they behave in a way that, with limits, of course, as Naja says, there are challenges to all this because we are journalists. It's all about the rigor of our craft, which is vitally important in the world of misinformation. But they behave like they're chatting to their friends. We talk about friends finding out together. It's a different style of storytelling. We talk about horizontal storytelling, friends finding out together, not the professor of news giving the tablets of truth to a willing audience that are just happy to consume. But the point you make, Rasmus, about the platforms, yes, the platforms can be unreliable boyfriends. Some things work for a while and then they don't work. And you're sitting there wondering, what did I do? But the big audiences are there, so we need to be there with them. And it's constantly thinking about the signals you're getting from your audiences, about how to engage them, what engages them. And then just the final point, we talk about the news. And the news as a brand has a problem for many audiences, and particularly for young audiences. The deal can appear to be from the news industry, tell me 10 things to really frighten me about the world and now the weather. And for audiences, that's not a great deal. So we need to think differently about what's the offer. And the offer is actually help me navigate the world, help me empower myself, be useful. And what we often forget in the social media spaces, it is about the conversation. The point of publication is the start of the journey for your audience. What are you helping with them on the onward journey, the resources they need to get to? And then how are we ensuring that we give them something which works in a feed which has the latest drop from Netflix was the last thing they saw, their mates having fun in Ayia Napa, and now the news. Well, often they're going to scroll past that if it's done in the wrong type of way. It needs to be as engaging. Then as the final point for the news movement, it also needs to be vertical. So audiences understand where they are. So we already have 3 brands now. So there is the news movement, which is all about engaging, non-partisan, factual information to help people navigate the world. We have our first acquisition was The Recount in America. It's a political socials site, which is about political news for younger people driven out of New York and Washington. And we have our new brand called Capsule, which is about engaging people in the world of fashion, celebrity, how they live, what's cool and what isn't. And so people know when they come to us, they can go to different spaces for different experiences. So it's understanding your audience lanes. And as Nick said, the one size fits all is a model that really struggles in social media spaces.
Thanks, Kamal. I mean, Jane, I want to bring you in from a Reuters perspective here, because part of what Kamal describes is a sort of, here are 10 things that went wrong in the world yesterday, side of how some people are turned off by what they perceive to be depressing and irrelevant and not actionable news and information. But there is perhaps also sometimes a question of irreducibly diverse societies that are very disputatious, where we may disagree about things. And I wonder, when we talk about here polarized audiences and news avoidance around some of these things and trust, at Reuters you have to operate in line with the trust principles that Alessandra outlined at the beginning. How do you deliver on that in an increasingly fractious digital environment where friends can find out together, but they can also call one another names? How do you navigate that at Reuters?
Well, I think it is a sad place where we are in the world at the moment that is so fractious, and where the art of disagreeing agreeably has become such a difficult thing to do. But from a Reuters point of view, it's never therefore been more important to hew to the trust principles. I mean, if everyone's going to be arguing their point according to what they last read or what they had for supper or the last thing they saw on Twitter, then you live in a world where people hew to their own truth, my truth or different people's facts and whatever. So therefore, it's more and more and more important for us to get to good fact-based reporting from around the world, where we are, as our handbook says, we are telling all sides and we're taking none. And I think that it's so vitally important for a company like Reuters to be able to invest in reporting from around the world. We've added another 200 journalists to the newsroom over the last year in order to have people on the ground who can really get to the facts and really put them out there for our clients. Be they the financial clients, the media clients, or indeed people reading Reuters online and engaging with us directly. And it's in a way a moment where we look incredibly unfashionable, so unfashionable that we're incredibly fashionable. It's funny, like talking to young people I know, there are some, and they say, oh my gosh, so hang on, Reuters doesn't belong to anybody. Reuters isn't left or right. Reuters isn't of one country or another. Oh, I'm going to follow you. I want to know kind of what that is. And, so we're now the only major news organization that has still a very large bureau in Moscow as well as in Kiev. We have reporters, brave reporters on both sides of the front line. We are telling the story of both sides. And I think, as you said in your intro, Rasmus, sometimes that means that we tell stories that people don't like because they don't want to see the other side of the story. And that might be around politics, that might be around finance. We are following very closely the anti-ESG investment movement. Lots of us in this room would think, how on earth can you be anti-environmental investment? But there's a huge wave in the States. People don't like reading about it. They get cross with us. Why are you platforming these people? Why are you talking about it? Because it's happening, So I think it becomes so important, therefore, to kind of double down on that fact-based reporting, being ready to take the blows. If people come to us and say, how dare you tell us what Prigozhin has been talking about in Moscow? Because he said it. It's important. You have to understand the world. So in a way, I think that becomes an even stronger, a stronger proposition, but then also a stronger shield when people come to criticize us.
And what about the point that Nick made in the presentation and that Kamal also alluded to, that some of the people who, like myself, sometimes selectively avoid the news, have an appetite for constructive stories, for stories that incorporate an element of solutions. Are these things that you work with at Reuters?
Very much so, yeah. I mean, it's been something that we've been hearing from our clients over the last sort of 3 to 4 years, and so we've really put in a huge amount of work to think about how are we telling the story. It goes back, Kamal was just saying, what is your storytelling method? I mean, bad things are happening in the world. Sadly, there are at least 10 bad things that happen before you get to the weather forecast. But then the question that we're often asking, and a couple of my colleagues in the room, Tom is around somewhere, has been brilliant at doing this, is really thinking, yes, there's a war on, but let's go and talk to the people who are involved. Let's find the rays of hope. Let's find out, the person who's actually been able to go and save people from flooding, and bring them to safety. Let's go and find the person who's working to help other people. Animals, of course, always do really well. Anyone helping an animal always gets lots and lots of views. But the truth is that we are, by nature, human beings are by nature optimistic. And if we weren't, we would have died an awfully long time ago, right? It's part of our survival mechanism is to be optimistic, to look forward, to find the hope, to find the way forward. And so I think that as news editors, what's really important for us in our newsrooms is to be thinking, here's the big story, rather than doing, as one of our clients said to us, you do love men in suits getting out of Audis. So rather than telling the story of the men in suits getting out of Audis, let's go and talk to the to the people who are impacted by the decisions of those men in suits getting out of Audis. Let's go and talk to the people who maybe aren't getting their voices heard by those men in suits getting out of Audis. It really makes us think about news editing and news gathering in a different way, of not just taking the institutional point of view, but really going out and reporting on the real world effects, the real people who are involved and impacted.
So we talked a bit about the distribution side of how one connects with the public. We talked a little bit about the journalism itself, the actual content and the craft of the journalism, but we also need to talk about the funding side of this. I mean, journalism is a vocation, it's not an avocation. It takes money to do reporting and to edit and publish it. Kamal, over the years, we've been told versions of the sort of there is no business for news and social media by many different publishers, Rupert Murdoch, Matthias Döpfner of Axel Springer, and most recently with the seal of a recent convert, Ben Smith, formerly of BuzzFeed. How do you see that proposition from your point of view?
Just like the storytelling techniques that we're hearing about, to be successful in this market, we have to be profitable. Journalism is costly. We did big investigations into Syria. We've been at the Mexico border to look at the immigrant crisis. That stuff matters and it costs. So we need to be profitable. The change that we are pushing towards is a very varied revenue model. So yes, you will get some income from platform, and it's important that the platforms understand their role in supporting journalism and also supporting
do they understand
partially.
that role?
Look, they're on a journey, and it's not the full focus of their business, obviously, but the conversations are better than they were a number of years ago. I spent 8 very enjoyable years at the BBC working with Naja for the last 3 of those years. It's a tough conversation, and as Naja has said on other panels, and to me as a former colleague, it's not their business model. News is not their business model, so therefore it's only part of what they do. It's a tough conversation. The income from platforms is lumpy. When Meta, as it was Facebook, made the big decision on news feeds and changing the newsfeed algorithm, it was very destructive for many news organizations. So as news organizations, we cannot be reliant on platform income. What has tended to happen is a sudden format and style will work on a platform and it will be monetizable because the platform wants it to be, and we all rush to that side of the boat. You have to protect yourself from that. So we have some platform income, but it could be volatile, it is lumpy, and you have to be careful with how reliant you are on it. But it's an important part of the mix. But for the news movement, we then have media partnerships. So we help media organizations work in the very varied and sophisticated social media storytelling market, which frankly, if it's not 100% of your day job, you're not going to understand it. So we help media organizations do that globally and nationally here in the UK, and we hope in the future nationally in the US as well and elsewhere. That's another income stream. Then in a separate business, a studios business, we work with trusted brand partners on their storytelling. How do they speak? Understanding the necessities of the platforms in terms of how you storytell. So that's called The Collective. That's our business in content, which is commercial, totally separate from our editorial business. And then finally, data and analytics. Look, Rasmus, the Reuters Institute report that we're seeing today is all about deep data and deep understanding of issues. Every day, the news movement across our 3 brands gets millions of signals about our audiences, particularly young audiences. That is an incredibly valuable data, analytics and material about particularly this core audience of 18 to 25 and how you can communicate with them in a generous, positive way to create impact, whether that's as journalism, which is so important and is the purpose of the news movement, or whether that is for brands, other media organizations and other partners that the news movement's going to work with. If you can get that varied model to work, and we're already seeing, we're coming into, our second year of public-facing editorial brands, third year as an actually operating business, we are seeing clear revenue in all 4 of those areas. That is the business model we hope for profit with journalism at its core for the future.
Now, if we rely on the BBC's broadcast or the iPlayer, your funding model is rather simpler than the one that Kamal describes. Either we pay you or we go to jail. You described a very ambitious vision for the way in which you think the BBC can deliver on its mission going forward. Is there sometimes a risk that if you succeed in that you make life more difficult for some of the other people on the panel or counterparts elsewhere in the industry?
I can say no, actually, and I'm fully convinced of that. And I have worked in commercial media, I've worked in a digital startup, I've also been working in public service, and I firmly believe, and I think there might even be research backing this up, but that a public service media like the BBC, that we are not taking from a market, we are creating it. I think if you look around the world and if you look in your findings, all of the countries that have got very popular, very used, very strong public service media are also the places where the private media thrives the most and where the willingness to pay is highest. You saw the Scandinavia where I'm from. In Scandinavia, it's almost kind of North Korean sometimes. The public service reach is 90-95%. But still, you've got thriving titles of all sorts. You've got thriving subscription models or digital startups like Kamal, and then they invent Spotify. So it's not. I don't buy for a second. It's a bit like this. Do we choose our own platform or social media? We know we journalists, we like a simple story, right? We would like it to be black or white. But there is. I'm just thinking that we are not only helping the BBC if we grow and thrive. I think if we do that, then more people will engage more with what is going on, and that will make them more curious and more likely to subscribe or to spend money or be willing to engage with journalism. And that I see it as a core part of our public service role. That means, of course, that we should be very, and that's my personal belief. I get very inspired and very happy when I see a new startup like Kamal's thriving or any other place. It helps us modernize. It gives more value to the audiences. I think the ecosystem is really important. I think I might be one of the persons that are subscribing to most private media personally, not paid by my employer. I'm the Telegraph, the Times, New York Times, Washington Post, all of those. I find it so interesting, and I must say, New York Times. I know they are kind of the one we look at, because it is fantastic to see a legacy business that would be out of business had they not modernized. See them not only really investing in journalism and getting the journalism to work for their narrow, elite, wealthy audience. Let's be honest about that, right? It's a very narrow. It's not public service. It's going after a specific audience, but then creating that bundle with games and cooking and now The Athletic. I find it totally fascinating and very inspiring, and I do, from a BBC point of view, think that we are maybe on track to do something similar as we're joining up our services, both kind of in the data platform and the sign up and how they are interconnected, iPlayer, sounds, BBC Sport, news, what we're doing internationally. We do believe we have a fair chance of delivering even more value than we do now, not only to people in this country, but around the world, by accepting that people do not only need news, they need a lot of stuff, and not a valuable, inspiring, empowering content. And luckily, we're producing a lot of that already. Most of it, we're still producing in a way that is first and foremost serving people that love their radio and their television very much, that have that habit of coming home, putting on the telly, watching from a specific room, or something. But of course, increasingly people are more not having those habits, and as we are becoming better at serving those audiences well, and we know for video, long form video, be that drama or be that a news story or a radio or audio offer, being digital first is not only about distribution and storytelling. And I think maybe we have lost a little bit of time in the media business, thinking we could get away with only changing the distribution and the storytelling. and not changing the actual content, the actual journalism. The journalism needs to be modernized as well. It needs to be a broader agenda. It needs to be more constructive, more rounded, not only negative news stories. Because and it's not that we should shy away from that. Absolutely, we need to do that, but we need to do other stuff as well. And I wanted to come back to a point Nick mentioned there. I think that it's interesting, this point about one size does not fit all anymore. Because if we take an honest look on the news industry, we can see clearly in the numbers now that the classic selection of the 10 negative stories, where you follow the front line of, war and corruption and whatever political conflict is out there, we have to admit to ourselves that there is a narrow audience of elderly men that really love that stuff, right? And they are following it a bit like inside cricket, right? It's day in, day out. And we love them, they're our fans, right? But it's maybe 10% of the population, right? Everyone else have other stuff they also do, right? Take care of their kids, maybe they do something fun with their partner, maybe they're engaging maybe they're scouts or whatever, and in that kind of life, you do not have time to follow every development in a war or the appetite for it. So we need to have that broader stuff. And I think what we've done recently in the past years in heightening what I called our digital sophistication, making, not only having a digital team, but 10 different digital teams that are specialized in search optimization, constantly responding to the needs, looking at what different audience groups are doing, making sure that there are different types of content and that it is not only negative, but also inspiring and providing explanation. Or our recent launch of BBC Verify, which is a specific thing where we've gathered all of our teams that are specialized in open source investigations and using them also to respond in real life. So when we had that riot and violence breaking out in Ely in Wales, and you remember the police said they were not chasing the boys, and we've got now this team that then quickly found out that they absolutely seem to have been chasing the boys, which is something that we then can provide the audiences with right when they follow the news. And of course you could call that a negative story, but what we can see in our numbers is that a lot of people, and especially young people, come to us in those situations and they really want to see good journalism there. So my point is that I don't believe for a second that there are people that never want to hear about negative stuff. They want to hear about things that are problematic or negative or full of conflict in certain moments, and then they want information that clarify for them what is going on, whether it's dangerous for themselves and what it might mean, and then they want to go back to all the other priorities in their life.
You can see with my timekeeping skills that I have more chances in the extended chat format that Nick identified in the broadcasting. I want to make sure we get Jane in on this last point about business, and when we've heard from Jane, I hope it's okay we go a little past the hour to open up for a few questions. When we do open up for questions, please raise your hand and identify yourself when you ask the question. I will aim for having a diverse range of people asking questions, so if I don't ask people to speak in the order in which they raise their hands, that is why, and that will be my ambition. Jane, at Reuters, how do you see your role in terms of the evolving business of news as more and more of your media clients are trying to build up pay models, but so far at least our research suggests that the curing sort of single bundle model is a very heavily winner-takes-most market, dominated by a few big titles, and of course dominated by platforms in terms of advertising. How do you see about your role as this business evolves?
Well, a bit like Naja said, I mean, we fully believe in the importance of a thriving and healthy news industry. I don't think everyone in this room is here because we believe in that, because it's a passion of ours to make sure that journalism continues to exist. And we're delighted that some of those winner takes most, in fact I think all of the ones that you had on the slide there, are clients of Reuters whom we can serve with what they need in their very advanced and often very creative business models. And it's interesting what Kamal was saying about his sort of 4 pillars of of revenue. And I think one of the big changes that we have seen over sort of the last decade is that the creativity used to sit really in the newsroom around, what was the creative journalism that people were doing. And increasingly, we've seen the need for great creativity in the business side and the commercial side, really kind of coming up with different ideas, building up new teams, working with different sets of data, turning around that model so that you've kind of got that audience-led model across both the commercial and in the newsroom sides of things. So really kind of from the Reuters point of view, our job is to get out there and speak to all of these amazing people who are doing the creative business modelling and the creative journalism, and really to get close to them to understand what their strategies are. I mean, we have thousands of clients around the world, so what's right here in the UK might be very different from South Korea, where I'm going to be next week, so it's understanding what different clients need and then being able to support them in what they're doing. So there will be some who are public service media who don't need to worry about the payment side of things, or public service media who do need to worry about the payment side of things. There will be others who are startups who are starting up a new business model, and then there will be the New York Times of the world who have a really good model, and others who, frankly, I don't know if they're going to be around in 5 to 10 years' time. I hope they will be, but the challenge, we saw it, 17% of people, and it's flat, paying. Naja is clearly pulling that average up with her mega stash of subscriptions, but for every Naja, then there are 5 or 6 people who are paying nothing, So all of that to say that I think it's for us to kind of go around, share our knowledge, share your report, share sort of some of the stories that we've heard from clients around the world to help people figure out what they're doing. And then sadly, very often if revenue's coming down, then costs have to come down. We've already seen, there's the report yesterday, 2,000 almost jobs in the US already lost in news so far this year, and we're only in June. When costs have to be cut, very often, conversely, oddly, ironically, people then come to a company like Reuters because we will provide that global take on the news. People still, in this very interconnected world that we've been talking about, the clients in South Korea still does want to know what's happening in the UK and vice versa. So if we can then provide that news that's useful for them to be useful to their audiences, then we're doing them that service as they're trying to work out their business models.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks to all the panelists. Let's open it up now. There'll be rowing mics. So if you have a question, raise your hand. I will start here in the front, and the gentleman in the green polo shirt, please. So there's a mic coming from behind. Please identify yourself and ideally direct the question at one of the panelists or myself.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Yu Bing and I'm from CGTN. So my question is to Naja. So everybody knows the BBC right now have a new reform on the global and also the domestic news strategy change. So on digital news, how do you guys differentiate the audience from the audience from the different countries across the world, and also the audience in the UK, and how can you make sure that it can be targeted from the different groups of the people, and then the different content can be delivered to the people? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll take a few. So that's a clear question for Naja. There was a question here at the back. There was a lady with glasses in the back. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Kirsten Deer. I'm Global Director at Data Miner. I guess the question I have is, Nick wrapped up his presentation by saying, I promised I wouldn't talk about AI. Obviously, none of it has been mentioned on the panel. I'm curious about that. Why not? And is it strategic or burying head in the sand? Maybe one for Rasmus related to the actual report, but anyway. Anyone else?
Thank you. I'll take that one, and then we'll take one more here at the front, and then we'll get some responses and see where we get to with time.
Hi, I'm Holly Cook from The Economist. I'm Holly Cook from The Economist. I'm interested, I think this is probably a question for Naja, about personality that came up in the report and how people are drawn particularly to that at the moment, and that's a rising trend. I'm wondering what that means for organisations like The Economist, where anonymity is part of our integrity, and that is highly unlikely to change. Like, how do you think, and that's not just The Economist, that obviously applies to many organisations. How do you think an outlet like ours can sort of navigate this market, given that desire for personal connection, when we don't want to have personalities up there?
Holly, I hope you don't mind I ask Kamal to respond to this.
Yep.
There's a lot of thinking around that at the news movement, and that also means that we can have sort of a bite of the apple each of us, in a sense. So, Jana, I think you have a lot of thoughts on generative AI as well.
Yes, I do.
So why don't we start with you, Naya, the question about how you think about audience differentiation as you expand your global operations.
It's a very good question, and the way we do it is that I was mostly talking about our UK side of the operation, which is funded by public service, which I can say is a business model, right? And it is not secure. Let me just get that out there, right? That is something, if we're not delivering value for everyone, it's not going to be there. To quote a Disney executive, 100 years of history is no guarantee for the next 100 years, right? We know that. So we know we are on the hook for delivering here. But globally, we are operated in English commercially, and then we've got a government grant that supports our World Service operation. That means that we publish in 41 other languages, and we are present in more than around 70 countries, and that means that we've got teams that are in those countries and that are people from those countries and that have specific expertise in those audiences. So we use the same method, you can say, and when we know a lot about how to serve people that live in Wales, but we also know a lot about what different audiences in India, where we publish in I think it is 13 different languages, how the different audiences have different needs. And it's not that it is not complex, and what is interesting for us, and I think maybe healthy for our culture, is that while we are very big, and sometimes maybe some would say very big here in Britain, right? Then in nearly all other markets, we are very much a challenger brand. And that means that we have to fight our way through the internet to get to people. In the past, we had a strategy where we took, I would say, we went for any reach, right? So we were mostly on social media platforms. We are increasingly investing in our own platforms and getting a more direct relationship to our users, and that is connected to Nick's point about one size does not fit all, because only if you know people and you are in contact with them, only if you've got that data are you capable of diversifying what you give to people and also learn from what they're doing and make them better. And I think we have to remember when we talk about the platforms that every so-called data that we get from the platforms it's a marketing the likes are and the video views, it's not the same as our own data. And this is, of course, data, Kamal was talking about it. It is the new currency, right? Data is the currency. If you don't know what your audiences are doing, you cannot serve them well on the internet. So this is why we are striving to get a more direct relationship. And then we are, and I've talked about this publicly as well, we are expanding in America because we are building out our commercial operation in English, because we can see that there is a real appetite. We're really expanding in the US, but we are planning to go on to other territories or countries in the world. But in the US, we can see we are the most trusted news organization, and there is a real appetite for someone who does not have a dog in the fight, right? Especially in a country like America. Last thing is, when it comes to World Service, the way we prioritize where we are and where we aren't have very much to do with democracy. So we are using a lot of money to make sure that there is information in Russian, also when we're being closed down on Telegram, on all sorts of, we're trying to find whatever way we can. In Iran, in Afghanistan, in many of those countries, we are the only reliable news source, I would say. And that's a very high priority for us as well.
I will just add this. I think basically there are only two kinds of news media organizations left in the world. There are niche publishers who know that they're niche publishers, and then there are niche publishers who suffer from the delusion that they're mass publishers. And what I mean by that is, if you take the BBC very big in its domestic market, as all your private sector competitors would be the first to tell you, you probably account for something like 2/3 of linear scheduled radio listening in this country to this day. Mm-hmm. You probably account for something like 1/3 of linear scheduled television viewing in this country. Online, I would think maybe 2 or 3% of time spent online. In a sense, you are, in one sense, very big, but in another sense, you're a challenger brand, even in the domestic market.
Yeah.
Kamal, I'm going to turn to you next, and thanks, Holly, for humouring me on sort of switching the concept.
Apologies, Holly, that you're getting.
I know
you're
you've
getting
thought a lot about
best,
this. I think you'll give us a lot to think about.
Sean and I will speak to you afterwards. Much more useful answer. But I think it builds a little bit on what Jane was saying earlier, and why you have actually been so successful in digital spaces with the Economist offer, is because, as we've been discussing on this panel, variety is the key to this new ecology. So even though we are all about often what we call face-first journalism, so the young creator doing the job, you can see them, that's one connecting point. But one of our most successful formats is the word-driven explainer, without a face on it at all, because it's a very varied market. Although personality-led is an important part of engaging particularly younger demographics, it's not all they want. What's wonderful about this social media space that we're all in is that there are many varied ways of connecting with audiences, whatever your core DNA. So as Jane says, the Reuters core DNA is hyper-fashionable. That notion of trust and not being hash ad, not hash PR, not hash misinfo, that is in the DNA of Reuters, it is in the DNA of us, it is in the DNA of the BBC. Audiences are looking for that type of material. And The Economist has, again, that depth of trust that is so important in this market, where particularly you're seeing from young audiences, they want to break out of the echo chamber and, frankly, the mess. We've had this first generation of social media, which has created all these problems in journalism and in information, where the media industry, frankly, has moved too slowly. The audience has shifted, the media industry has slowly moved, and that has created this misinformation because bad actors have been quicker than we have. We've learned some of those lessons, and we are moving more quickly, many organizations. New organizations are coming into the market, like the news movement, and we are rebalancing that fight for audiences to be able to find easily engaging, useful information to help them navigate the world. And if I think to myself, one product that helps people do that, it's The Economist. The method for The Economist, as you say, is an anonymous method, but it still allows for great socials content because it's text. There are very clever text-based formats, and as I say, one of our most engaging and successful formats for the news movement is the word on screen explanation, where the word is just single word, and actually it's a gaming format. It's a way that people explain how they game, and that's where we took the format from. It's very big on YouTube as a style, and it's about journalism understanding how we learn from gaming, how we learn from what is successful in social areas, but never ever losing the DNA of your business, which gives you trust.
Let me just add to this. I think going beyond the individual personality, I think your own colleagues at The Economist were early pioneers of giving The Economist a personality using social media with visual communications, Denise Law, Tom Standage and others, which I think gave The Economist, for people who encountered it through those visuals on social, a fuller view of what The Economist is than what they might associate with sort of a stiff guy like me carrying around a printed magazine and looking very serious, that there was something more to The Economist than that. It's also that, but that it could be more than that and could be sort of quite humorous in a very sharp way sometimes. So I think in a sense some of your colleagues have done really important work around this. On generative AI, I will say something very quickly and then turn it over to Jane, who have far more to share. I will simply say this, is that we, like everybody else, are both sort of terrified and tremendously excited by what generative AI will mean and might mean for journalism and news and for members of the public across the world. The reason we don't focus on it in the report is that we're empiricists. We like data, and the surveys in the field in late January, early February, where a lot of the things that now have very large user bases were in their infancy or not really direct-to-consumer tools yet. So there are lots of people who have practical experience, like Jane, who I'll turn to next, and there are other people who have opinions, and that is fine as well. But we like evidence, so that's really the only reason why we don't look at it in the report. But we hope to do more work in the future in that area, even as we learn from those who have opinions and particularly those who have experience. So Jane, tell us about generative AI.
Oh, sure. How long do I have? 3 minutes? No, I think just to follow on from what Rasmus was saying, I think the partner report to the Digital News Report, which looks at audiences around the world, is Nick's predictions report that you see coming out in January, where he actually speaks to practitioners in newsrooms, and that did touch a lot on AI. And actually some of the conversations that we had around that in January, when, as you say, ChatGPT was kind of like, had suddenly blown all of our minds, and we were all kind of going, oh my God, what to do with this? Was a huge part of that. So I urge you to go back and read that bit from a few months ago, although we're already 6 months on. But very quickly, I think, so in terms of AI, I think it is such an enormous opportunity for news. I think it's a great threat as well, but I think I'm going to be the optimist and Miss Positive here and say that I think a lot of the challenges that we've been talking about today, we can possibly use AI to help us face those challenges. That might be in terms of reaching new audiences, it might be in terms of reversioning our content, it might be in terms of lessening the load on our news gatherers in the newsrooms when they're having to go through lots of data or lots of rote type stuff, or press conferences and reporting on press conferences. We can free them up from doing that with machines in order to get them free to do other more creative, more audience satisfying journalism. I do, however, think that we are in part of the hype cycle where everyone's going, oh my God, everything's going to change tomorrow. And then everyone's going to start playing with things and go, oh God, this isn't very good, is it? And it's fascinating to me. I get to work with brilliant data scientists and incredibly bright mathematicians in Thomson Reuters who've been working on AI for many, many years. And they will tell me that 85% accuracy is fantastic. This is really good. The machine has learned. And we know in the newsrooms that 85% accuracy is appalling. We're not going to publish something that's 85% accuracy. So I think that where we are now, June the 14th, 2023, let's see where we are in a year's time when we reconvene for next year's report, is that there are huge opportunities. There's a lot of experimentation that we should be doing. We should, however, and I think journalism is in a great place to do this, we should be experimenting responsibly. We have ethics and we have standards. We know how to deal with data. We know how to deal with information and misinformation. So experiment responsibly is the first point, I would say. The second point I would say is that at the moment, the generative AI tools that are out there publicly, and those of us who have private ones as well, are not 100% accurate. So a human being always needs to be in the loop. So that famous human in the loop is really critical for our brands, for the trust that we spoke about earlier when Nick was showing those charts. The last thing we want to do is to damage our own trust by relying on machines and then making a stupid error, starting to go down a stupid path and actually shooting ourselves in the foot. So we have a rule here at Reuters that anything that has any AI in it is checked by a human being before it goes out, and that human being is responsible for what went out, just as they would be responsible for what a reporter sent in from the field. Unless we are confident that it's strong enough and it's good enough, so a machine translation, for example, we're happy that it's good enough for some of our financial clients, in which we'll put a very transparent disclaimer at the top saying this was entirely translated by machine, and at the bottom we will explain how we use the machine translation. So I think those three points really. I think we're at a very exciting moment where we can experiment responsibly. I think it's really critical that we have that human in the loop and that we are learning how to use the machines, and also that the human is training the machine, and that's a machine learning cycle. And thirdly, that we are very transparent with our audiences so that we take them along on this journey of what's trustworthy and not. That might also include then fact-checking popes in puffer jackets and DeSantis making Trump kiss Fauci and things like that.
Thank you so much, Jane. This part of the conversation we have to end now, but the conversation around the Digital News Report continues until the next edition is published next year. So please check the report. Please engage on social media. If you want to sort of hear more about the research, reach out to us, whether for reporting or for your own purposes. Thank you, all of you, for coming. Thank you to our panel, and thanks to our hosts at Reuters for having us today. Thank you so much.